on down? Father to son, father to son, father to son. And it's interesting how the scriptures actually say that God in the last days is going to turn the fathers back to the children and the children back to the fathers. So once again, we see the opposition here, the counterfeit side coming in with their play, you could say. And Aleister Crowley's objective was to split up the family. And the reason being is simple. Because Satan knows in his mind that if he can cut off the race of God's righteous people, because the Bible tells us clearly that God is going to have a righteous people before he comes again. And Satan knows, and not through our own righteousness, through Christ's righteousness, remember that. So Satan knows if he can cut off this line of people of God, then God will not have that last people, that last jewel in his crown to basically be a righteous people where God can pour out his Spirit upon the earth, and then they can finish the work. So if Satan can end this, and he knows that if he can attack the family before the children can actually get in their minds that God is good and all the things that the scriptures teaches, if he can cut that from his mind, because of his delusional mind, he thinks that he can actually win this war. But the amazing thing about being God's people is we already know who wins, don't we? And then came along the drug revolution of the 1960s. Now a lot of people don't know this, but this was such a major event of our history. It was because of this drug revolution and the whole 60s hippie era that it allowed the entire change that Aleister Crowley had been planning to take place. And we're going to have a look at how he actually developed this. Crowley says, this was written about him, sorry. Crowley became an expert at a dozen or so varieties of Hindu and Buddhist yoga. He experimented frequently than anybody in the West before the neurological revolution of the 1960s. Now remember how I was saying before that Aleister Crowley, he was going to try to join Eastern mysticism and Western occultism together. This is one of the ways he did it and started to do it. He began to make the whole mysticism, Eastern mysticism with all the gurus and all the god-men of India very popular. And what started happening, especially after the Beatles actually started hanging out with one of these gurus, the whole world began to know about it. And then you started seeing on every single corner all these yoga places popping up here and there. And you see all this stuff began becoming really popular amongst the people. So that was one way he began to introduce these things. The other was spoken about here. Crowley played a decided role in developing the philosophy or the mystique of the drug revolution. Now, Crowley actually used to experiment in every single different type of drug, even before the 1960s revolution. He used to experiment in his prayer sessions, you could say, to see what drug actually worked best in getting that mind into that spiritual state. And I know about this personally because I used to take drugs when I was in the music industry, and I used to take ecstasy every now and then. And drugs like this, they bring you into a state where you do feel at this higher spiritual plane. And especially when you start hearing this music playing, especially if you play the right type of music, you can trigger this reaction where you start going in this really spaced out mode where you feel almost like you're a god. And it was because of a lot of these drugs, I believe, that I allowed a lot of spirits to come into my life, which led to me trying to get rid of them, which I could only be done because of the power of Jesus. Harry Hay goes on to say, "To 2/3 of the world today, music is a language, a method of communicating, organizing, educating, mobilizing." You see, Harry Hay was, after Aleister Crowley died, Harry Hay was a gentleman who actually continued the work of Aleister Crowley, and he saw himself as the child, you could say, of Aleister Crowley to continue the work. And Harry Hay knew the power of music. And this gentleman wasn't a little figure either, because he actually was the guy who actually founded the entire homosexual movement, and he actually basically made it gay popular, you could say, in America. He goes on to say, this language, music, had the power to communicate ideas, plans, and issues through the form of songs and dances under the noses of authorities as a weapon. Music always has had the power to inspire revolt and revolution. So with these men, with their doctrine on board and their plans in their mind, what was the weapon they used to initiate all their plans? From their own words, it was music. They knew the power of music. And it was Aleister Crowley that began bringing all the drugs into America and telling the right people in the occult what drugs to get, how to get it involved in the music, and how to bring these kids into a spiritual plane. And that's what happened. When the 60s revolution started up, they started smoking marijuana, and they were going, wow, this is so peaceful, man. And yeah, they just became these new, loving, green tree loving kind of people. Yeah, so that was the results from the 1960s movement. There was a massive peace movement, and all the protesters of that time went out and stopped wars even, like the Vietnam War. It was because of the protests in America that all those wars stopped and that America pulled out. So music is a powerful thing. But we'll slowly start bringing this together now to form the final picture. Kenneth Anger, co-founder of the Church of Satan, said, "Christianity has had its day. Crowley said it would be replaced by the Aeon of Horus, who is the crowned and conquering child." Okay, let's say this in English. Basically, the Aeon of Horus is basically in their mindset, when Lucifer sets up his reign on earth as king. So is this giving you a bit of an idea why these guys thought music was such a powerful thing, and how they mobilized music for their purposes? And you can see the results of it now. They wanted to end the family unit because they knew the family unit carried the knowledge of God down. And what has the music industry of today done? It's turned the children against the parents. So we can see a lot of these things that he planned that have occurred now. So it makes you think, how close could we really be to God's coming? We must be nearly at the door. Robert Anton Wilson goes on to say, "It is this synthesis of Eastern and Western occult traditions with modern scientific methods that is probably Crowley's major achievement." Now, there's something amazing in this quote here, because we were talking about how the yoga and stuff like that came into culture and that influenced, but that's not the main thing. Tell me, what religion out there is a mixture of Eastern, Western occult traditions and mixes it with scientific methods? Scientology. Aleister Crowley, it's amazing.